Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop, Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton, your host. And tonight we've got some new folks on. You've never seen our first guest. This is his maiden voyage. But before he comes on, hopefully we're going to run a radio ad that he did last month that I just thought was wonderful. And so we're going to try and run that. Hopefully our TriCaster is going to let us do this. So can we get that up and running?
I'm Richard Bolger, Congressional candidate, and I approve this message to end the shutdown and get Virginia back to work.
Parents, Halloween has come early, and a wolf is at our doors. Frank Wolf. He shut down the government to hold our economy hostage. Wolf's been in Congress 32 years, and this is what his experience has brought us: total Tea Party extremism. While Wolf's Tea Party plays games, thousands of Virginians are furloughed and left out in the cold, while Wolf still collects a paycheck. And our fragile economy has taken one more punch to the gut, just when we were getting off the mat. Frank Wolf, his party, his politics, and his leadership have brought us the shutdown, because you can't teach an old wolf new tricks. Frank Wolf, his
I really just like that. So I want to introduce everyone to Richard Bolger. He is the sponsor of that ad. He is planning on running against Frank Wolf, Congressman Frank Wolf, in the 10th Congressional District. So welcome. I'm so glad that you could come, Richard.
Thank you, Bettina. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, let me tell folks a little bit about you. You are a graduate of American University with a degree in political science, and you are also a graduate from George Mason Law School. You were elected to what is called in Virginia the legal elite, and this is for bankruptcy work that Richard has done on behalf of people. You have said that you make the laws work for regular working people. And certainly that is well worth doing, since the legal profession, as we both know, can be a little bit difficult for non-lawyers to understand. So congratulations on your election to the legal elite.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Well, you've also been married for 35 years to the same person, which is, to my view, a huge accomplishment. And you've got 4 kids.
Sure.
But I want to go back and talk about that ad, because I thought that ad was terrific. It was really hard-hitting. Is that going to be your approach?
Sure. I mean, that ad was run right after Frank Wolf voted to shut down the federal government. And we were not going to let that pass without telling the voters that Frank Wolf voted to shut down the federal government. And, come next November, we don't want people to forget about it. So we had to make sure, hold him accountable for his vote, because we knew he would scramble around right after that and try to get back pay or whatever. But the point of the matter is, he voted to shut down the federal government. He voted along with John Boehner and the extreme right wing, the Republican Party, the Tea Party, and people need to know that. Well,
why are you running? Is it just because of the sequester? I mean, what drove you to decide to do this?
Well, it's time for change. This is the most dysfunctional Congress in the history of this country, and Frank Wolf is a part of the problem. He's been in Congress for 32 years now. His voting now enables, as I said, enables the right wing of the party to advance their extreme agenda, which is directly contrary to the interests of Northern Virginia's 10th Congressional District, which I'm sure, Bettina, you know, has 45,000 federal workers in it. We depend upon the federal government to function properly, and the entire country does, but not any more so than the 10th Congressional District.
Well, I remember many, many years ago, 32 years ago, when Frank Wolf ran. I was actually in his district at that time.
Me too. I was too, yeah.
Thankfully, I'm not anymore. But what I remember, and I always laugh every time he runs for re-election, is that he ran on term limits.
Oh, I know, yeah.
And I think to myself, what term limits is he talking about? Because he's been there for 32 years. When does that limit come up? So you're going to try and force the limit on the man.
Well, I mean, people have raised that ever since. Yes, initially elected, he advocated a 7-term limit. He's been in there 16 terms. I think every candidate that's tried to beat him has beat that dead horse. The man's obviously been in there forever. That issue's been around forever. It shows that he is a career politician. And this is the type of thing that I am not. I'm a businessman, a father, a community activist. I'm a person that comes to Washington to solve problems. I'm not there to have a career job, up on Capitol Hill. That's not what I'm there for. I want to get up to Capitol Hill and solve some of the common problems. And obviously, this is the most dysfunctional Congress in the history of the country. We need problem solvers. We don't need Frank Wolf and other career politicians at this time.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your community work, because you said you're a community activist. So what have you done? Because many people don't know you.
True.
So what have you done that make you the person who should run for this?
Sure, thanks for that question. Well, there were really two things. I used to live in the Drainesville district. I have lived in the 10th Congressional District for 32 years. Mm-hmm. When I lived in the Drainesville district, Route 7 was of great concern to me, okay, because Route 7 was like an expressway between Tyson's Corner and Leesburg. But the people that lived in the Drainesville district, we would go back and forth across that road all day long. Mm-hmm. And my wife and I, Susan, we have 4 children. And we, as they were being born, and I realized, we're driving these babies around Route 7. It was dangerous. And there was one day, you may remember, years ago, if you were there, where a dump truck came out of Tyson's Corner and hit a car at Lewinsville Road and killed 4 teenagers, a tragedy beyond belief. And that happened, and shortly thereafter there was another deadly accident at Colburn Run Mill on a Sunday morning. I went up there with my kids. I saw a helicopter fly over. I said, I'm going to do something about this. I reached out to the Drainesville supervisor. I reached out to Frank Wolf's office. No action whatsoever. Wrote articles in the paper. Next thing you know, I was able to form a coalition of hundreds of local citizens there. We formed a coalition called Citizens Advocating Route 7 Safety. Long story short, we were able to get changes at those 2 intersections where you couldn't turn with discretion on Lewinsville Road. You had to have a green arrow. They have a flashing strobe light at Colburn Run Mill. Right. These are 2 things I did back then. There have been other so that was really the biggest thing. And nobody helped me, by the way. In fact, Frank Wolf was of no use whatsoever. He would write a letter. I'd say, that's nice, Mr. Congressman. I need you to do something. And he just was not a man of action. I realized that back then, and I haven't forgot it, and I'm here to get after him. I will be aggressive. It's time for change.
Okay. Now, you also did a lot of coaching of youth sports. I read that. It's up on your website.
Sure.
So you've also been involved in that aspect of the community. What do you say to the folks? Because different people have said to me, well, but that's not enough. It's not enough. There should be more involvement. And how can someone, and this is a question, this does not just go to you, by the way. This comes up every single time someone runs to run for things. It's not in the trenches. He hasn't been on boards and commissions for the county. He's not in the party. I have no idea if you're in the Democratic committee. He hasn't done these things, and he's trying to leapfrog himself into Congress. As if you're jumping over people. I'm not sure that's the case. But, so what do you say to those people who say not enough?
I say to them, I've been on the front lines of representing and helping Northern Virginia people for 30 years almost now. I have helped people deal with the problems from the collapse of the real estate market. I help them with calamities that occur when they've lost their job, they've become sick, they've had marital problems. There may be a combination of those things. I've helped everyday middle-class citizens in Virginia, and not for any glorification. I'm doing it to help people. Again, this is one of the reasons I'm running for. This is maybe the top reason I'm running for Congress. Is because I'm doing it to solve people's problems. I'm not looking for a career job, okay? It's time for change. We need action. We need Congress to function. The government's being shut down. And so what I say is, you need problem solvers, you need someone who has been in the trenches. That's where I've been, okay? I've not been. When I had worked on community affairs and I organized a coalition, people would say, well, you're going to run for politics. No. I was there to fix a problem. I wanted to raise my family with my wife, and I sent my 4th of 4 children off to college this year, and decided the time is now. I can spend the time. I can go take the skills and experience that I've learned for the past 30 years representing everyday citizens in Northern Virginia and apply it to the district as a whole. I have learned a lot, and I've been in the trenches the whole time.
Okay. Well, then let me ask you something else, because we've had some other folks challenge Frank Wolf. I mean, the last several years we've had people, I think the last 4 straight times. And I know that Senator Warner and now Senator Kane both won what would be the 10th Congressional District in their races. But the people who have run in years past never even managed to break through the 40% mark. So how do you think you're going to do that? What makes you think you can do it this year?
Well, because now more than ever it's time for change. Now we see the government is shut down. People are being furloughed. Frank Wolf is actually voting to. The results of Frank Wolf's votes have caused people to lose income and lose their jobs. I think people see that now. They're fed up. They want change. They want to get new people in Congress. They're greatly dissatisfied with incumbents of all sorts, and they know Frank Wolf is not a part of the solution. He is a part of the problem. Again, he has enabled John Boehner, the right wing of the Republican Party, and the Tea Party extremists to advance their agenda. That agenda is completely contrary to the interests of Northern Virginia's 10th Congressional District, and people know that. And I ran my radio ad to make sure they don't forget. I am working hard every day to make sure we get the message out to the community that it is time for change. I'm the person who can do it. I'm in Western Fairfax County, and I have a lot of support. People of all walks of life are telling me, it's time for change. That man is not part of the solution. He's part of the problem.
So even though most people would not think that Frank Wolf is a Tea Party person, because he certainly presents himself as more moderate than that,
Yeah.
your position is he's enabling them. He's got to go.
Very well said, Bettina. He is an enabler. He does enable. Or he's really, and on social issues, he's the Ken Cuccinelli of Northern Virginia. I mean, he is a guy who would be on social issues, as I said, as far right as you get. So on economic issues, anti-government Tea Party voter, and on social issues, he's Ken Cuccinelli of Northern Virginia.
So is that how you differ from him? Let's talk about some of these social issues. We've only got about 20 or 30 seconds before the break. But so one of the things sort of Ken Cuccinelli was known for was his anti-women rights, anti-reproductive rights.
Right.
Where do you stand on all of those issues?
Okay, well, I have two daughters, and my wife is a registered nurse. I strongly support the right of a woman to make any choice free of government interference regarding reproductive rights and all health care decisions.
Okay, so that's pretty flat out. There's no ambiguity.
No ambiguity. Nope.
All right. Well, we're off to a straight up start with Richard Bolger, who wants to run against Frank Wolf in the 10th Congressional District in 2014. I know we just finished a whole bunch of elections, but we do this every year in Virginia, so I want you to stay tuned because we're going to come back with Richard Bolger.
She's had more than a dozen fractures. And in the next few years, she faces 2 major surgeries to strengthen her fragile bones. She's only 10 years old. Most people don't worry about fragile bones until late in life. For those with osteogenesis imperfecta, brittle bones are a concern throughout their lifetime. Find out how you can strengthen this child's future.
Diabetes is a killer. After I was diagnosed, I didn't feel sick, so I didn't listen to my doctor. Then it struck. I had a heart attack, then a stroke, and I was only 49.
Most people with diabetes also have high blood pressure and cholesterol, which can cause severe heart damage. In fact, 2 out of 3 people with diabetes die from heart disease or stroke.
Don't let diabetes destroy your life.
Call for your free diabetes survival guide. Choose to live.
To the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton, your host of Inside Scoop Virginia, and we are back with Richard Bolger. He wants to run against Frank Wolf in the 10th Congressional District in the elections in 2014, and I'm pleased to have him. I understand this is his maiden voyage, so far so good, I think.
Great to be here.
Well, let's talk. When we went off for the public service announcements, we were talking about areas where you were different from Frank Wolf, and we talked a little bit about women's reproductive health, and you were pretty clear. Women ought to be able to make their own decisions. Government shouldn't be involved in that.
Absolutely.
So give me some other areas where you're different.
And let me just make
Frank.
one comment more on that,
sure.
if I can. I sat and became very upset watching the build up to our last election when people like Ken Cuccinelli started to advance proposals in Richmond to accomplish things that were really, he couldn't accomplish any other way legislatively, couldn't get it voted through. In other words, a woman has a right to make choices regarding her reproductive health. But then, so what do? You try to make regulations or, regarding the way you would have it, such that it obstructs that right. That kind of thing, trying to play a backdoor game with the citizens and to try to accomplish your own personal agenda, that really annoyed the heck out of me. So, I just went.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, and it was always all the regulations, the abortion clinic regulations were all done in terms of women's safety. But all of the experts said it had nothing to do with women's safety whatsoever. How many parking spaces you have, how wide your halls are. Please, give me a break. But let's go back. So, Frank Wolf. Give me some other areas where you and he differ, because I have that sort of view, and I've told you this before, that when you're dealing with an incumbent, anybody challenging the incumbent has to be able to say, this is why he needs to go. So why does he need to go? How else are you indifferent from him?
Well, I guess I would say my three biggest problems with Frank Wolf are the way he has handled the government shutdown, the supporting of the government shutdown, the contributing to the agenda of the right wing of the party while trying to maintain this image. I'm a moderate Republican. It's not my fault, the Ken Cuccinelli type of support for issues, women's rights. I am a complete supporter of marriage equality. Frank is not. I have a gay son. I want him to have the right to marry whomever he chooses, and I want him to be able to live in Virginia without feeling that if he works there, he might get fired. I also know that Frank voted to, privatize Medicare, a voucher system. I believe he supported vouchers for schools, too. I'm a big supporter of the public school system. My children have all attended public schools in Fairfax County. They're well educated. They have fantastic teachers. They all graduated from Oakton High School. Each one of them went to a different Virginia State University, which is kind of an interesting story, but those
it's tough to do. A lot of our kids can't get into our own universities.
It's outrageous. I wish I had time to really focus on that. The idea that people with 4.0s can't get into the state university is just beyond me.
Yeah,
right.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Well, let's go to some other federal issues. Things like foreign policy. A lot of stuff has been in the news with lots of different countries. We apparently are just... everything's a mess.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of those, because I don't know where you stand on some of these things. So things like we apparently are having some problems in Afghanistan with their president not wanting to sign our agreement, and we're saying, well, if you don't sign the agreement, we're going to be out. Do you think we should be that strict? Should we give him more chances, or should we just say, you don't want, you negotiated this agreement, you either did it in good faith, so sign it, or you didn't do it in good faith, and we're done?
Well, let me tell you a little bit about myself before I answer that question. First of all, my father was a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and an 18-year Navy fighter pilot. He then went on to NASA and worked on the program resulting in the America landing the first man on the moon. But he instilled in me a great deal of pride and honor in serving the American military and serving your country. I've always been counseled by him. We were very close, passed away recently. But he has taught me a great deal about history and a great deal, about the military and how it functions, its responsibilities. He actually patrolled, the south off the coast of China, which has suddenly become, after 50 years, a big issue again. Right. And so I guess, Afghanistan, the whole area. I mean, I believe Israel is our closest ally over there. We have to take a lot of, a lot of input from them as we make our decisions. Afghanistan has been contributed to the fall down of the Soviet Union. Complicated issues, things that Congress needs to work on. But again, evidence of the fact that more issues that will never be solved with the Congress we have now. We have a dysfunctional Congress until we are able to get a bipartisan approach to all of these complicated foreign affairs issues. Really, we're just spinning our wheels in many ways. So again, for Congress to serve a useful purpose on addressing these issues, we have to get new people. We have to change the incumbents. And again, that's why I'm running.
Let me ask you some other things that came up last year particularly, and it's another one of those things that people said. I think on NPR they were talking about Obama's lost year, that he got reelected and they thought we would end up with federal gun control because of the horrible situation in Sandy Hook.
Terrible.
And then nothing came of it. And that's an issue that Republicans in Virginia always play against the Democrats, saying that we want to take everybody's guns away. But I saw a recent poll that said a lot of Virginians, particularly in Northern Virginia, want sensible gun legislation. Is that something that you would be willing to look at? This sort of went nowhere earlier this year, but it's a continuing issue, and I think it's just sitting there waiting for us for the next tragedy to happen. Again,
another issue on which Congress has refused to cooperate and refused to work on a sensible, common sense solution. An incredible majority of American people want common sense answers to the problem of situations like Newtown. My son, one of my children, goes to Virginia Tech. I cannot walk around that campus and look at those memorials without thinking someone has to try to make a difference. You have to keep guns away from the criminally, mentally insane people, and obviously felons or whatever, convicted felons. So I'm in support of universal background checks. And I am also in support of closing, and when I say universal, I mean including any gun show loophole that may be out there. So yeah, I'm totally in support. But the Republicans haven't even let that issue come up for a vote in Congress. It's irresponsible, and the American people cannot forget that. They have to get out, vote, and hold these people accountable.
Well, I absolutely agree with that, and it is just a shame that some of this stuff just keeps getting buried because they are too busy fighting and repealing the Affordable Care Act. I mean, how many times have they done that? It's up in the 40s sometimes. Yeah. Right. It's kind of like, but let's talk about that for a second, because there was some talk that the rollout of the Affordable Care Act, the healthcare.gov, went so badly that it actually helped some of the Republicans who were running for office this last election.
Yeah.
What do you think of that? I mean, friends of mine who used to be very senior in the government basically said to me, boy, if somebody on my staff did that, the heads would be rolling.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you feel about what's happened with the healthcare rollout, with Obamacare, as we call it, in general? Does it need to be changed? What do you think?
Well, as a small businessman, I can say this to you, that my health care expenses for covering my employees, and I have always provided health insurance for them, that expense has been growing and growing. Well before President Obama introduced that legislation, I have become more and more concerned about the ability to provide decent insurance. I have people that I could not switch plans because they had pre-existing conditions. And now you can. I have people who, I have children in their 20s. I can now keep them on my plan up until age 26. So those things are good. We want to provide the best health care possible for as many Virginians at the best price possible. The website, apparently, it seems to be maybe even getting better. I mean, I have to say, over the weekend, I checked I filled out a small business application and didn't have any problems. I'm no computer genius, let me tell you. But I didn't have any trouble doing it.
Good to hear. That's encouraging, actually.
No, I didn't. And so, I mean, I'm willing to give people an opportunity to fix things. I'm not the kind of lawyer who would go out and sue everybody because they made a mistake. Look, let's try to get it right. Let's work together. Let's get the problem solved. Let's get Frank Wolf out of Congress and stop playing games with American health care coverage, and let's start solving some problems.
Well, I assume, based on what you've said, then you would be in favor of the Medicaid expansion that Virginia seems to be sitting on, where nobody seems to be doing anything.
I believe Governor McAuliffe is as well. I believe the state of Kentucky recently, they took the Medicare expansion, and they have their own exchange set. They embraced the change, and apparently they're really happy with it down there. So I think, if you fight something and you obstruct it, and then you blame the other guy for the problems, I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Right. There does seem to be the common denominator where the health care exchanges are working is where the states have embraced them,
right,
as opposed to places like Virginia where we're doing nothing fast.
Right.
So hopefully Governor McAuliffe, doesn't that have a nice sound to it, Governor McAuliffe?
Yes.
Hopefully he can get something done on that. Let's talk about another issue. It's a federal issue that affects Virginia, and that's the Voting Rights Act. As you probably recall, the Supreme Court issued an opinion, which I thought was completely wrong, but what do I know, that basically said Section 5, which requires the preclearance, wasn't enforceable. And it covered a lot of Virginia. And this may be the same problem that we've been discussing the entire time here. It's completely dysfunctional. Congress hasn't done anything to try and fix that.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that you would be in favor of trying to present the kind of record that the Supreme Court seems to think needs to be done so that we can go back and have preclearances and people's rights can be protected? Or do you think we need an entirely new kind of system or
my impression of people who are oftentimes advocating the repeal of voting rights legislation are just people who seem to be wanting to obstruct the ability of people to vote. We should make the ability to vote as simple and easy for every single citizen of the country, and unless there is some overriding event that I'm not aware of, all I can say is that that's my guiding principle, and we may even be able to use technology we have now to improve the ability for voters to vote. So I don't know. It's just nothing to obstruct any problems with voting.
Okay. Well, we didn't get to talk immigration, and we didn't get to talk Social Security. There's so much left. But I want to thank you for coming, and I want to remind our viewers, his name is Richard Bolger. Check him out at richardbolger.com.
Thank you very much. All right. Thanks a lot, Bettina.
Art, a universal language, an expression of culture, of self. And now, thanks to Empowered Women International, a way for emerging and established immigrant and refugee artists and artisans to find hope to earn a living while enriching the lives of all of us. Empowered Women International, making a better America every day. For more information on Empowered Women International's educational programs or to make a tax-free donation, contact C. Fripp at AOL.com.
You'd think it would be easy to tell which kids have trouble with their eyesight. But that's not always the case. Even though 1 in 4 children may have a vision problem, eye doctors tell us the symptoms aren't always so obvious. We do know that 80% of all childhood learning is visual. And without good vision, kids can have trouble learning to read. And may fall behind in school. For clues on how to spot the real-life signs of childhood vision problems and what parents can do, visit checkyearly.com. A public service message from the Vision Council of America and Reading is Fundamental.
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. This is Inside Scoop Virginia, and I am Bettina Lawton, your host, and we have switched guests. But to set up what our next guest is going to talk about, we are going to run a clip from our dear friend, Will Rogers. Hopefully, the clip will be ready to run, and we will start to see it.
Now, recently I saw a news story that said that some select elections were still happening around the country a month later.
4, 5, lost count.
Boy, it's getting harder to find a winner these days. Or, of course, less and less people are voting. So I'm going to jump into this whole voting thing with my own PSA, public service announcement, on voting.
Vote, vote, vote.
First off, I've noticed that a lot more people are talking about politics these days. All over the place, every day. Which is kind of odd, because it used to be that we would steer away from talking about politics and religion, unless we knew that the folks we were talking to were like-minded, or they could be civil. But then came the birth, or the hatch, of social media. Try this little exercise. In a group of people, ask folks to raise their hand if they were unfriended or they defriended anybody on Facebook in the last elections.
Oh, yeah, that was me.
But here's the rub. A lot of the folks I have conversations with about politics have very strong opinions. But here's the thing. Most of them don't register to vote. Or they won't vote.
I'm just too busy to vote.
I'm not going to go into the reasons why we have this countrywide disease. But sometimes it makes me sad when I go on to Facebook and I see all the 4-letter words that people are saying to each other. The only 4-letter word I want to hear, or this country should hear, is vote. Hey, if you don't like the two political parties, start your own. But history has shown that that's not been too successful unless you start maybe a tailgating party. Yeah, that's what politicians should do. Instead of those campaign rallies, throw a town hall tailgating party. And they can serve food, free, and we could all get pumped up. And in the end, we'll have the politicians pick up the garbage.
Finally, a job for Congress.
I say the way that we should run the presidential races is first and second. First, Republican or Democrat, president. Second, Republican or Democrat, vice president. That way they have to work together, not apart. Maybe there'll be a lot less politicians cheating the voting system and a lot more sportsmanship. Sportsmen, sportswomen, sport. We gotta work on that word. I'm Will Roberts, and this is your weekly telegram.
Well, there we go. For those of you who've been watching for the last several weeks, you'll know that Will comes on. He's coming to us from Los Angeles with a little comedy piece based on whatever it is that we tell him we're going to be doing. So now, with that as our backdrop, I want to introduce Ben Tribbet. Those of you who have watched before know that Ben has been on the show before, and he is a political consultant. He is a blogger. You see him all over Facebook, and as Will said, all those people talk about all kinds of stuff all over Facebook forever. So, Ben, welcome.
Thank you for having me on, Bettina.
We want to talk about a couple of things because, of course, I want to get your views on the election that just concluded. We were going into the election. You saw all of these articles in the Post in different places saying, it's going to be McAuliffe in a walk. And then he won by less than 3%. So what happened? In your view, what happened?
Well, I think part of what happened, Bettina, is the Cuccinelli campaign was always focused in on a core group of supporters, and they knew that their supporters were likely to vote, and they were pushing their voters. And if you look at what he was doing the last few weeks of the campaign, it was all towards his base. Mm-hmm. And where Terry was trying to operate both within the Democratic base and was winning independents by a wide margin, and so he wasn't able to operate on one set of issues that appealed across his entire base, and so his voters just were not as energized, whether it was on the left or in the middle. He wasn't giving them exactly what they wanted to be as energized, and Ken's voters were all showing up, and I think Ken did a much better job of mobilizing the support that he did have to come to the polls. And it's worth noting, even though Ken lost, he got more votes than any Republican other than Bob McDonnell ever has for governor.
Wow, so, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, he's the first Republican other than Bob McDonnell to ever crack 1 million votes.
Well, let's talk about this, because Terry McAuliffe now has a bipartisan transition team in place, and he's carrying over some of the people from McDonald's. Is that, in your view, a good play for him? Because he can't run again, so I guess he doesn't have to appeal to the base. But
well, he's trying to work with the General Assembly, which obviously the House reelected 67 Republicans out of 100 seats. So he has to figure out a way to be able to deal with them. But at the same time, I'm not sure they want to deal with him. I'm not sure that a few holdovers from McDonald's is going to help with that. The Republicans tend to deal with force in the General Assembly more than they do with friendship. If they feel that someone is a political force, they might fold to them. For example, Mark Warner was seen as having a lot of political leverage. He's very popular. They didn't compromise as much with Tim Kaine because they didn't think he was as popular. Terry's coming in much less personally popular than either one of those two. And I don't see the Republicans feeling like they need to give a lot of ground, especially when they've won 67 seats down ballot from Terry. They're probably wondering what's the worst he could do to us in a midterm.
Well, I guess that is the question. I mean, so are we looking at, in your view, 2 years of nothing getting done?
I think the Republicans will get what they want to get done, and they'll send it to Terry, and the question is whether he wants to sign it or veto it. Mark Warner took a strategy of signing a lot of the Republican bills to get them more friendly with him. Tim Kaine vetoed more. I expect from Terry's positions that he'll veto more, but he may decide strategically he needs to sign some of these bills, and they're going to put as many of their agenda bills on his desk as they can to force his hand to make a decision.
Well, is there any hope, someone suggested this, is there any hope that Terry, in his bipartisan attitude, would look around the state and say, here's a House of Delegates district that I think if I took that long-term Republican incumbent out, we could get a Democrat in there? Is he likely to try and lift them out so that we have a shot at breaking that veto-proof House of Delegates?
Well, I think he could look at a couple. The problem is, Bettina, because you got the Senate, it's already 2020, he's already able to sustain a veto there. So the House is sort of meh to him, I think.
Okay.
I think he's sort of looking at, 65-35 is not going to be that different than 67-33 to him. Mm-hmm. And he's sort of got to deal with what he's got. In fact, there's a lot of Democrats that want it to be lifted out of the House because they're looking for retirement pensions. And, in Virginia, your top 3 years counts towards your General Assembly service as well. So for those legislators that have served over 15, 16 years, they start looking for a state job to get their top 3 and leave the House of Delegates. And I think there's a lot of Democrats who've been in a while now who might be looking at this saying, and maybe it might be time to get some benefits and head to the hills.
Well, that would certainly, and particularly if he's taking them out of very Republican districts, or Democratic districts anyway, that would free up a whole bunch of seats that have sort of been keeping the younger folks out.
Right.
Because of incumbents.
And if you look at Northern Virginia, it's been a shocking amount of turnover in the last 5 years even. I mean, most of our delegates now are less than 5 years tenured in the House of Delegates for Democrats, while most of the Republicans are more so because most of the people that have been down there a long time as Democrats, what's the purpose of staying down there in the House of Delegates? Now, the Senate, you have a lot more tenured Democrats because they may be in the majority. They're constantly competing. But the House has really become so Republican now that there's just not a lot of point to fighting for it if you're 60, 70 years old. If you're 30, you might go in there and think, well, maybe by the time I hit Medicaid, I might be able to...
You might be able to do it.
Something.
Great.
Be in position to be Speaker by then, I guess. So.
Wow. That's definitely long-term planning to do that. And I have wondered, with some of these folks in the House of Delegates, how frustrating it must be to be down there when you can't get anything accomplished. If you don't have a Republican co-sponsor or get them to adopt whatever it is you want and have them just go it on their own, you don't get much done.
Well, and I think the Republicans in the House enjoy the density of just sort of ignoring reality on some issues, and they'll come around all together at once. But, for example, when they rejected the gay judge, a lot of them did that together and just sort of said, well, we have very serious concerns about this, and then eventually they sort of gave up and said, all right, fine, we can have a gay judge. But it's sort of, they're trolling the Democrats and just riling them up and getting them upset. And, when Vivian Watts put in her amendment to stop one of the abortion bills from applying to birth control, they voted that down. And the Republicans in this campaign have been shocked that Democrats were accusing them of trying to ban birth control. They voted that amendment down. And part of I think the reason they voted against it was, again, they're trolling the Democrats. They're enjoying riling them up, making them think we're trying to ban birth control and let's get them. And it backfired on them big time. But that's what they do down there. They're messing with the Democrats. They're enjoying the fight. And the Democrats are in no position to fight back in the House. Right. So it's a pretty ugly game.
Yeah, that's like, I always laugh when people talk about the Virginia way as if it's some genteel game down there, and it doesn't seem that way at all from up here in any event.
Oh, no. Absolutely.
Well, let's talk about Northern Virginia. We had only one Democratic challenger win, Mike Futrell.
And I was his pollster.
You were his poll? I didn't know that.
Right.
Well, then you're going to know the answer to the question, which is, how did that happen? How did Mike Futrell win? I mean, he came on the show, a lovely man, but when he won and was the only one who won, well, he's a very nice man. You know, some folks I interview are not so lovely, right. but he was very nice. He was very congenial. Right. But I was very surprised when he was the only one who won.
Well,
what happened?
A few things happened. First of all, the reason I was his pollster was he was an untargeted race. The House Democrats actually never targeted his race. And so when you're an officially targeted race, you have to use the vendors that they've selected for you. So I wasn't actually involved in any of those campaigns on that level. Our company does small level race polling, and we couldn't do it in any of the other races because the House Democrats wouldn't let us. So I can't tell you all the details of those. But since they did not target Michael, we did do Michael's race. And one of the things we found in that was that Michael's district is on the Prince William-Stafford border, and it has two very different sides. The Prince William side, which is right on Route 1, actually is more Democratic than Arlington.
Wow.
And the Stafford side is about more Republican than most counties in far southwest Virginia, and the precincts that they selected from Stafford. So you have two very different politically motivated bases. The Republicans drew it the way they did because about 56% of the voters come from Stafford and off-year elections. But when the presidential election came around, the turnout was much higher in Prince William. 52% came on the Prince William side. Barack Obama got 59%. So what we immediately picked up in our polling was exactly what the old results had shown, which was if we could get Prince William County to be roughly equal Stafford County in the results, Michael was going to win. There weren't a lot of undecided voters. It was a question of what the composition of the electorate was going to be. And so he was able to put all of his resources, very meager, by the way, not a lot of resources.
He didn't raise a lot of money.
Into GOTV. And that GOTV was able enough to bring Prince William even to Stafford in turnout. And if Prince William equaled Stafford in turnout, he was going to win from day one.
Wow.
Very simple race.
That's fabulous. I didn't realize that's how that played out. I didn't realize he's got sort of the schizophrenic district with half one way and half the other. I didn't realize that was how that
It was just a question of being able to mobilize those voters in Prince William, many of whom are younger minority voters, to come to the polls, and Michael did.
And was it a personal ability that Michael had to drive those people to the polls?
I don't know if I would say it was just him that could have done it, but he was particularly good uniquely in that he's a young African-American man who is demographically similar to the rest of the district.
Okay.
But, could other candidates have done it? Sure. Someone else could have pulled it off, but he had a unique appeal there, and that is a majority-minority district on the Prince William side. Okay. And so he was able to do a very good job driving that turnout.
Wow, I had no idea. So I asked a simple question and I actually learned something really terrific. So I want you all to stay with us. We are going to come back with Ben Tribbet. We're going to talk recounts. We're going to talk special elections because the Senate, control of the Senate hangs in the balance. So stay with us and we'll be right back.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's some matches and that's no good. Yeah. Listen to smoke before you give it a try.
Only you.
Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about a great top life. Nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Yeah.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home? When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water. At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site. That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff. You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People! The flood is imminent! Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton, your host, and this is Inside Scoop Virginia, and we have Ben Tribbet with us. He is a political consultant and a blogger, and we learned he's a pollster as well. So we are back, and I want to talk about another set of challengers for Democrats who failed miserably. And those are all of the women challengers, with the possible exception of Jennifer Boysko, because she is going to have a recount.
Which she's going to lose.
Well, we'll talk about that too. So why did the women lose? Every single woman challenger lost.
Well, clearly people don't want to vote for women.
Okay, we can be provocative. Why would that be?
I think each race is its own individual set of circumstances. I don't think it had anything to do with the women challengers versus men. I don't think that any of these districts were particularly competitive at the start of the cycle. A lot of them became competitive because the cycle was so good. Mm-hmm. And you saw a lot of people who were losing big early come in at the end and have very competitive races. And in a lot of times, when you have those types of things, the infrastructure isn't there. You're just sort of catching a late fire and trying to take advantage of it, but you don't have all that infrastructure on the ground. And that's what we've had a lot of candidates over the years that have ended up between 45 and 49% that have lost in the House of Delegates because they just don't have that infrastructure in place. And really, the only times that we beat incumbents are sort of in Northern Virginia, special circumstances. Senate is very different. The districts are much larger. And so Senate incumbents are a lot weaker. But House incumbents, the districts are smaller, they're more stabilized in their community. And where you have, say, a Jean Marie Davis in the Senate who Chap beat, who has a large district where much of it may not even know her when she runs in the Senate. A Dave Albo in the House grew up in Springfield, which is his district. Tom Rust was mayor of Herndon. Barbara Comstock's in McLean, which is in the heart of that district. And so these people are actually in the hearts of their districts when they're delegates, and they're much tougher to beat. It takes a much better campaign, which none of these challengers had. And what they did have was some late momentum, and it just wasn't enough in most of the cases to carry them over the top.
Well, you mentioned they need infrastructure. I thought that's what the House caucus was supposed to do, was provide structure for people.
Well, it's easier to provide structure when you're at 45 members out of 100 looking for a majority than when you're at 32. The House caucus only had the money to fund 4 challengers this year until Terry McAuliffe came in with a late $1 million that he had helped raise them in October, which is why you saw the field expand from about 4 targets to 11 targets, because that's where they got the late money. They didn't even have money to target most of these races until the very end.
Were any of the women candidates targeted at the end?
Yeah, they all were targeted at the end. I'm not sure they were at the start. I mean, and in the case of Jennifer Boysko, she was down 17 points over the summer, according to her own polling. Kathleen Murphy down 20 points over the summer, according to her own polling. I think some of that polling was wrong, but that'd be a whole different topic. And so the House Democrats had sort of, in a lot of ways, written them off over the summer. And then polling came back in October during the government shutdown. Kathleen up 3, Jennifer down 3, very competitive races. They made it back on the target list. And again, I'm not sure that polling was right either, but it was showing momentum. And it was sort of just, let's throw money at it and do some mail and see what we can do for them, rather than how do we build an infrastructure in these districts that can win. And say Jennifer Boysko, for example, a great example because it was so close. She lost Herndon number 1 by 250 votes, which is 1/3 of the town of Herndon, where Tom Rust lives. Where she lives in the town of Herndon, she won. The other part of the town of Herndon, when neither one of them lived, she won. But where he lived and where he had that infrastructure in place, she couldn't match it. And that was what it turned into, was where Jennifer could match his infrastructure, she actually won. Where she couldn't, but she didn't have it across the district, and there were too many holes, and that's where it became just a slight differential.
Well, what advice can you give? You are a political consultant, and I understand that on election night, Jennifer said if she didn't prevail this time, she was going to run again.
She should.
And so what does she need to do then? If she's got, obviously, a problem in Herndon 1, assuming Tom runs again in 2 years, what does Jennifer need to do in order to win this time?
She has 2 years to get out there and really get into these areas where she knows that she's weak. And one of the things that first-time challengers a lot of times don't know is where are they strong, where are they weak.
Well, you had to know you were going to be weak in Tom Rust's own precinct.
Sometimes it's not as obvious until after you look at the results for people. And I'm not going to say whether I think it was or wasn't for Jennifer. I just think that clearly she didn't get there enough.
Well, what is she supposed to do now? Because before, when you say she needs to get out into the community, she was, as I understand it, John Faust's community person up in that area.
And she did a fantastic job in all the precincts where Tom didn't have that infrastructure to beat her. She needs to get into those areas that didn't support her and spend the next 2 years working over those people so that they get comfortable with her. Those were Democrats that didn't vote for her. I mean, Terry McAuliffe carried her district in a landslide. Ralph Northam carried her district in a landslide. Mark Herring carried her district in a landslide. They were all near 60% in her district. So these were not Republicans that stopped her. These were Democratic voters that crossed over to stop her. Same thing for Kathleen Murphy. The 3 statewide candidates won in a sweep. That's why the races were so close, because they got coattails to bring them with them. But they lost from Democratic voters, not Republican voters.
Wow, that's kind of discouraging.
Well, I mean, you've got to, as a candidate, you've got to be capable of holding your voters. And if you don't have an infrastructure in place to hold all your Democratic voters, then you need a bigger margin victory. And, and in the case of Tom Rust, I don't think Jennifer ever thought that he wasn't going to win any crossover. So she knew that this was a number. And the question is, how big is the crossover? How big is the margin? And she brought it to around 50-50. Best anyone's done against him. I mean, she deserves credit for that. But it's not good enough. I mean, she has to be able to have a district-wide infrastructure, and she can't have these precinct holes if she wants to win next time.
Well, you said in your comment when I mentioned that she was going to have a recount, and you said, well, she's not going to win it. So why are you so sure she isn't going to win it?
Well, so there's about 30 to 40 undervotes per precinct in her district from Election Day in her race that voted on Election Day but not recorded votes. So across her district's about 500 votes. She's down about 50. But the vast majority of those 500 will be truly blank ballots. They'll be spit out of the machines and the electoral board will look at them. Mark Herring's margin is about 150, 160 statewide. That's the equivalent of 1.6 per House of Delegates district. So when Mark Obenshain asked for a recount, a flip of one vote from one way to the other in each House of Delegates district would change the outcome of the Attorney General's election. In the entire House district, Jennifer's looking at a margin of 54 or 53 to change in one House district. So even if 150 of those ballots turn out to have some sort of marking on them, she would have to win 2/3 of them to win. And there's no indication. It would really take a statistical miracle for her to pull it out at this point. Where Mark Herring has a real worry with Mark Obenshain, because again, you're talking about 1.6 votes per House of Delegates district.
So what's your call on that recount? Is Mark Herring going to end up being the AG, or you think it's?
Well, I mean, it's hard to call something that close.
You go to Atlantic City, I understand.
I would bet on Mark Herring because the voting methods are different by county. And the downstate voting methods, many of them don't have as many ballots to recount because they actually use paper or computers, where we have manual machines here. So there's more likely to be outstanding number of votes to count in places like Fairfax, Arlington, Alexandria, Portsmouth, and not as many in Republican counties. So on paper, Mark Herring should have an upper hand, but when you're talking about this small of an electorate, it can be very unpredictable. Good example, Minnesota, when they recounted the Al Franken, Norm Coleman race. The type of issues that you run into where the machines can't count them is when 2 bubbles are counted, filled in, and they say that's an overvote.
Right.
Well, they might hand look at the ballot and find in that case one ballot had voted for Al Franken and also had written in for the U.S. Senate lizard people on the write-in line. And there was a big debate over whether or not the ballot should count, because under state law, there's 2 markings for write-in and for Al Franken, so that should be Republicans' overvote. The ballot should be thrown out. The Democrats said, well, since the write-in was for a fictitious name rather than a real name, the write-in should be thrown out and the vote should count for Al Franken. And eventually the judges decided that vote would count for Al Franken. So these are the type of ballots that you'll see in the recount that will get debated, and we'll find out if there's a Virginia version of the lizard people, we'll have to find that.
Well, I did hear that in some of the races that Mickey Mouse got some votes, so I think that you might find that.
I found in Arlington a couple years ago, Arlington actually tabulates all their write-ins, and I got 3 votes for Commonwealth's attorney, and I'm not an attorney, and I don't think anyone wants me being their chief prosecutor, so anybody can get votes for anything. That's
wow, that's pretty scary.
But none for sheriff.
None for sheriff. Well, it takes a certain sum to get sheriff. I know you're coveting that sheriff spot, but we got a new one, so we're good for a while.
All right.
Let's talk Mark Warner in 2014. Do you think Cuccinelli will run against him? Post says no. Okay.
I think Cuccinelli will wait to run for an open 10th district when Frank Wolf retires. He carried the 10th in this election.
Does he live in the 10th?
He does live in the 10th, and he carried the 10th in this election, and I think that's what he's waiting for.
Wow. And when do you think Frank is going to finally give it up?
When we field a candidate against him that he's concerned enough about that he doesn't want to run against them, because otherwise he's got a free route to Congress every 2 years, and until the Democrats field someone against him that at least runs close enough to make him sweat it out, I don't see why he would retire.
Okay. So who's going to run against Warner? That's not Cuccinelli. Who do you think?
Right now the front runner is named Howie Lind, who's the former Drainesville Republican chair.
But let's talk credible.
That's their most credible candidate right now.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you think if Obashain loses the AG, do you think he'd run against him?
No, he's not that stupid. Jeff McWaters is the only other name they have floating out there. He hasn't decided whether to do it yet or not.
I've never heard of that.
Well, state senator from Virginia Beach, multimillionaire who could self-finance part of his race.
Oh, well, that you have to do because Warner, what I read, said he's got almost $6 million.
Sure. But Mark Warner's very popular, and I expect that he'll probably cruise to re-election.
All right, so that's not something that's going to happen this coming year. Mark is probably pretty safe. Let's talk special elections. Okay. Let's talk Linwood Lewis versus Wayne Coleman, who I understand is a commercial shipping executive.
Yeah, that
this
was
is
not
for
so
Ralph Northam.
Not so competitive. Linwood Lewis, very popular on the Eastern Shore, won the Democratic nomination with huge turnout there. Right. Actually got more votes in a caucus on the Eastern Shore than Ralph Northam got in his lieutenant governor primary. And Ralph Northam's from there. So sort of put Ralph to shame a little bit in terms of who's more popular on the Eastern Shore. It's actually Linwood Lewis. We can definitively say that now.
Oh, that's fine.
So he should be able to cruise pretty easily. That's the more Republican part of the district. So him having such a strong base up there will give him an easy win. The Lawton seat.
Well, you've got Joe May. I saw has said
Joe
he's
May
going to run.
who, by the way, still has over $100,000 on hand from his House of Delegates account that he's going to be able to transfer in.
Very nice. Now you have John Whitbeck, who's the fellow who made that Jewish joke when he was introducing Cuccinelli.
Exactly.
Okay, and then you've got this guy Ron Meyer, who you must be for because he's a young guy, and you're all about young Dems, and so I assume young Republicans work the same way. No, because all he seemed to do was whine. The things that I looked him up.
Well, you don't like young candidates, but
I do like young candidates, but I don't like
he's not
the
whining,
whiners.
but he's not a real particularly impressive candidate.
He didn't seem to have his answer to every question that was asked in this interview I read was like, well, young people don't have a fair chance. And I'm like, oh, please.
Right.
So who do you think is going to win that?
Boy, it's going to be a great battle between Whitbeck and Joe May. Whitbeck has the support of all the Lawton Republican establishment. Oh, really? They're all very conservative out there. Joe May coming in, he has to move into the district, but the more moderate Republicans going to support him. That's going to be a battle to the death. And Jennifer Wexton, who's the Democratic candidate, probably the underdog against Joe May if he's able to pull out a Republican nomination, which would shift the Senate to the Republicans.
Right.
But probably the favorite against John Whitbeck, especially after he has to go through a primary against Joe May that'll split the Republican Party.
Interesting. Well, I guess then all the Democrats need to be looking and hoping that this Whitbeck fella wins so that we have a better shot at keeping that seat and keeping the Senate.
It's going to be very hard to beat Joe May if he gets the nomination, that's for sure.
Okay, but of course he doesn't live in the district. Some people...
Neither did Jennifer. They actually both moved in.
Did they? But is she already in?
Yeah, they both moved in from the other side of Leesburg. They actually were former neighbors in the other Senate district that have both moved to now potentially run against each other.
Oh, I love it. All right. Well, Ben, I want to thank you for coming. It's always enjoyable to have you on the show and get your insights into what's going on around the state. So thank you so much, and we'll have you back again.
It's a great honor to be here.